Look at you, an old black man selling barbecue thinks he can stand here and tell a police officer what to do? Officer Travis Boon sneered as he snatched Calvin Mercer's vendor permit from his hand and threw it into a muddy puddle. Before the 67-year-old black barbecue seller could reach for it, Boon shoved a tray of smoked ribs from the counter. Meat scattered across the pavement. "You're done here. Pack this junk up and disappear." "My permit is valid," Calvin said calmly. "You already confirmed that." Boon laughed. "Men like you always think one piece of paper suddenly makes you important." Several people raised their phones. Boon noticed and stepped even closer. "Take away that apron and rusty little medal, and nobody here would even remember your name." Calvin's eyes dropped toward the old military medal lying beside the ruined food. "Leave the medal alone." Boon smirked, then shoved it aside with his boot. Calvin moved forward. Boon grabbed his wrist. "Know your place." Then Boon slapped him across the face. The festival fell silent. Calvin slowly looked back at him. "Officer, are you certain this is the man you want to become today?" Boon reached for his handcuffs. Then, hundreds of synchronized footsteps thundered down the avenue. 500 soldiers appeared. Their commanding officer saw Calvin and stopped cold. "Don't leave yet," because Boon had no idea who he had just humiliated. Comment your city and local time below, and subscribe if you believe every person deserves dignity before anyone knows their title. 7 hours before Officer Travis Boon slapped him in front of hundreds of people, Calvin Mercer stood alone beneath the yellow light of his backyard smoker. It was 4:38 inches the morning. Fairmont, Georgia, was still asleep. Calvin lifted the heavy steel lid, and a cloud of hickory smoke rolled into the cool darkness. Rows of ribs glistened above glowing coals. 2 pork shoulders had been cooking since midnight. At 67, Calvin moved more slowly than he once had, but there was precision in everything he did. He checked the temperature, adjusted the vents, then brushed sauce across the ribs with patient, practiced strokes. On the wooden table beside him sat a framed photograph of his late wife, Evelyn. She was laughing in the picture. Calvin looked at her. "Big day," he murmured. Evelyn had dreamed of owning a barbecue place for years. Not a fancy restaurant, just a smoker, good food, folding tables, and enough chairs for strangers to sit beside each other. Cancer had taken her before they could build it together. So after her death, Calvin bought an old food trailer, repaired it himself, and painted 3 simple words across the side. Cal's Smoke Pit. No mention of his past. No titles. No photographs showing who he had once been. Just barbecue. By 6:30, Calvin was loading trays when Maya Ellis hurried through the gate carrying 2 bags of ice. "Mr. Cal, please tell me you didn't lift those coolers yourself." Calvin glanced at the 24-year-old woman. "I considered asking the ribs." Maya laughed. "They said no? Union rules." She shook her head and grabbed the nearest cooler. Maya had worked for Calvin for 11 months while saving money for nursing school. When her car had broken down, Calvin had quietly paid the repair shop and told her she could repay him whenever she became a nurse. She had discovered later that he never wrote the debt down. That was Calvin. He helped people and then behaved as if nothing had happened. By 8, Cal's Smoke Pit was parked along Liberty Avenue for the annual Fairmont Freedom and Service Festival. American flags hung above the street. Vendors arranged tents along 6 blocks. A stage had been constructed near City Hall, where military bands and local performers would appear throughout the afternoon. Later, hundreds of service members would march in the festival parade. A coordinator named Rachel Bennett approached Calvin carrying a clipboard. "Mr. Mercer, we still have space near the VIP pavilion. Better traffic, better visibility." Calvin shook his head. "This spot is fine." "You sure?" "The mayor's office specifically approved the upgrade." "Give it to somebody who needs customers." Rachel smiled. "You might be the only vendor here who turns down a better location." Calvin looked toward the smaller booths around him. People buying $10 barbecue shouldn't need a VIP pass. Rachel laughed and walked away. Maya began arranging containers. Then she noticed Calvin stacking several meals inside plain brown bags. "These aren't on the order sheet." "They're not orders." Calvin placed bottled water beside each meal. A small handwritten card went inside every bag. "Welcome home." Maya counted them. "Forte?" 48. "For the veterans?" Calvin nodded. "No charge. You know you're terrible at making money, right?" "So Evelyn kept telling me." For a moment, his smile disappeared. Then he closed the last bag. By 10:30, Liberty Avenue was packed. Families moved between food stalls. Music rolled from the stage. Veterans wearing old unit caps stopped to talk with one another. Calvin seemed happiest behind the smoker. He served everyone the same way. A city councilman waited behind a sanitation worker. A businessman waited behind an elderly veteran. Nobody skipped the line. Then Officer Travis Boon entered the vendor lane. Calvin noticed him because the atmosphere changed before Boon even reached the stand. At one booth, Boon ordered a vendor to move a sign 3 feet backward. At another, he demanded to inspect a permit already displayed clearly. A young street artist tried explaining that a coordinator had approved her setup. Boon interrupted her. "I didn't ask what somebody else told you." His partner, Officer Derek Sloan, followed several steps behind. Sloan looked uncomfortable. Boon eventually stopped in front of Cal's smoke pit. His eyes traveled over the aging trailer, then over Calvin's faded apron. "Permis." Calvin pointed toward the laminated document hanging beside the service window. Boon didn't look at it. "I said give it to me." Calvin removed the permit and handed it over. Boon studied it. His eyes narrowed. "This booth number is wrong." Maya looked up. "No, it isn't. The organizers moved us here this morning." Boon ignored her. "This says B17. Calvin pointed toward a small placard attached to the curb. "B to Jubilas. That's where we are." Boon stared at the marker. For a second, he said nothing. Sloan leaned closer. "Looks right to me." Boon's jaw tightened. He examined the permit again. "Your authorization code doesn't match the sector." Calvin remained calm. "Then call Rachel Bennett. She issued it." "I don't need you telling me who to call. I'm telling you who can confirm it." Boon handed the permit back. "Close the stand." "Maya froze." Calvin didn't move. "On what grounds?" Boon stepped closer. "Because I told you there's a problem with your permit. You haven't identified a problem." People waiting for barbecue began watching. Sloan lowered his voice. "Travis, we can radio vendor control." Boon ignored him. Calvin's tone remained respectful. "Officer, verify the permit. If there's an error, I'll correct it." Something about Calvin's calmness seemed to irritate Boon more than anger would have. "You think because there's a crowd here you can debate me?" "No." Calvin met his eyes. "I think if you're going to shut down someone's livelihood, you should know why." The line went silent. Boon stared at him. Then his attention shifted towards something pinned near the upper corner of Calvin's apron. A small, worn military insignia. The arrogance returned to Boon's face. He pointed at it. "And what exactly are you pretending to be with that?" Calvin's expression changed. Not fear, not embarrassment, something deeper. His hand slowly moved toward the old insignia. And for the first time that morning, Maya saw the warmth disappear completely from his eyes. Calvin's fingers rested over the worn insignia. "It's personal," he said. Officer Travis Boon gave a short laugh. "Personal?" He leaned closer, studying the faded metal. "You selling military stories with the ribs now?" Maya stared at him. "He never said anything about the military." "Wasn't talking to you." Boon pointed at Calvin. "Take it off." Calvin's hand dropped slowly. "No." The answer was quiet, but absolute. Boon blinked. "What did you say?" "I said no." A few customers exchanged uneasy looks. An elderly man wearing a Vietnam veteran cap stepped out of line. "Officer, maybe you should leave the man alone." Calvin immediately raised one hand. "It's all right, sir." "No, it isn't," the veteran replied. Calvin looked at him gently. "Please, enjoy your day. Don't get involved because of me." Boon smirked. "That's smart advice." He took Calvin's permit again. "You know what I see? An old black barbecue seller wearing military hardware so people think he's somebody important." Calvin's jaw tightened. "You don't know what that insignia means." "Then enlighten me." Calvin said nothing. Boon waited. When Calvin refused to respond, Boon deliberately released the permit. It landed in a shallow puddle beside the curb. Maya gasped. "Seriously?" She rushed around the counter. As she bent toward the permit, Boon stepped between them. "Back up. It's his property." "I said back up." Maya straightened. Calvin immediately moved beside her. "Officer Boon." His voice had changed. Still controlled, but harder. "You can disrespect me if that's the choice you're making. You will not intimidate her." Boon stepped forward until their shoulders nearly touched. "You giving me orders now?" "No." Calvin looked directly into his eyes. "I'm giving you an opportunity to behave professionally." A murmur moved through the crowd. Boone's face reddened. He reached for his radio. "Sloan." Officer Derek Sloan approached. "Yeah?" "Stay here. We may have a disorderly vendor." Sloan looked at Calvin, then at the permit lying in the water. "He doesn't look disorderly." Boon glared at him. "Did I ask?" Sloan said nothing. A woman in a dark green military service uniform had stopped several yards away. Captain Lena Ward had come to the festival between assignments and had followed the smell of barbecue toward Calvin's stand. But now she wasn't looking at the food. She was staring at Calvin's insignia. Her expression changed. Lena stepped closer. "Excuse me, sir." Calvin turned. Her eyes remained fixed on the small piece of metal. "Where did you get that?" Calvin looked down at it. "A long time ago." "You served?" Boon laughed before Calvin could answer. "Apparently." Lena ignored him. "What unit?" Calvin studied her face. There was something almost amused in his eyes now. "You ask every old man that many questions before lunch, Captain?" Lena glanced at the insignia again. "No, sir." That single word made Sloane look at her. "Sit." Calvin noticed too. He gave the slightest shake of his head. Boon stepped between them. "This is an active police matter. Move along." Lena frowned. "I was speaking with him. And now you're not." Calvin spoke gently. "It's all right, Captain." She hesitated, then nodded. But as she walked away, she pulled out her phone. Calvin watched her disappear into the crowd. Boon noticed. "What was that about?" "Ask here." Boon scoffed. "You really enjoy this, don't you?" "Enjoy what?" "Making people wonder who you are." Calvin looked almost tired. "I'm the man cooking barbecue." "That's exactly what you are." Boon turned toward the trailer. "And I'm about 5 minutes away from shutting this whole operation down." Sloane picked up Calvin's permit from the puddle and wiped it against his sleeve. "Travis." Boon turned. Sloane held up the document. "I checked the vendor code on dispatch." Calvin watched him. "So?" Sloane hesitated. "It matches." Boon's expression hardened. "The permit's valid." For 1 second, Calvin thought that would end it. Instead, Boon snatched the permit from Sloane. "I'll decide when we're finished." Across the festival grounds, Lena stood beside a row of military vehicles. She enlarged the photograph she had taken of Calvin's insignia. Then she sent it to a contact saved simply as Colin Harris. Her message contained 6 words. "Do you recognize this insignia?" The response arrived less than a minute later. Lena opened it. Her face went pale. There was no explanation, only a question. "Where did you see this man?" Lena slowly looked back toward Cal's smoke pit. Whatever Boon thought he was dealing with, she suddenly understood one thing. He had no idea who was standing in front of him. Officer Derek Sloane's words should have ended everything. "The permit's valid." Instead, Travis Boon stared at Calvin as though the truth itself had become another act of defiance. "Close the stand." Sloane frowned. "Travis, dispatch confirmed it." "I heard you." "Then what are we doing?" Boon turned sharply. "We're conducting a security inspection." Calvin studied him. "A minute ago, this was about my permit. Now it's about your attitude." Maya stared in disbelief. "You can't just keep changing the reason every time you're proven wrong." Boon pointed at her. "One more word and you're out of this festival too." Calvin stepped between them. "Leave her alone." Boon smiled coldly. "There it is again. You just can't stop challenging authority." "No," Calvin replied. "I just recognize when authority is being misused." Several people in the crowd murmured in agreement. That made Boon snap. He pushed through the entrance of Cal's smoke pit. "Everybody stay back." Calvin followed. "You have no reason to search my property. Festival security gives me authority to inspect suspicious items." "What suspicious items?" Boon began opening storage compartments. "Napkins, utensils, sauce bottles." Maya looked toward Sloane. "Are you going to let him do this?" Sloane hesitated. "Boon, maybe we should get a supervisor." Boon ignored him. Then he saw the wooden box. It rested beneath a shelf beside Calvin's personal bag. Dark walnut, scratched with age. The moment Boon reached toward it, Calvin's composure changed. "Don't." Boon stopped. For the first time, he saw genuine concern in Calvin's eyes. And he smiled. "What's inside?" "Personal belongings." "Then you won't mind me checking." "I do mind." Boon lifted the box. Calvin stepped forward. "Put it down." The crowd outside became quiet. Boon's smile widened. "Now I definitely want to see." He opened it. Calvin closed his eyes for half a second. Inside were several military decorations, folded letters tied with a faded blue ribbon, an old photograph, and a pair of identification tags. Boon picked up one of the medals. "Well, look at that." "Put it back." Boon examined it. "What is this supposed to prove?" "Nothing." "Nothing?" Boon laughed. "You walk around wearing an old insignia, keep a box full of medals under your counter, and expect everyone to believe you're some kind of war hero?" Calvin's eyes hardened. "I never asked anyone to believe anything." Boon lifted the photograph. It showed a much younger Calvin in uniform surrounded by officers. Time had faded the colors. Boon barely looked at their faces. "Bought this at a surplus store too?" Calvin moved closer. "Enough." Boon tossed the photograph back into the box. Calvin caught it before it struck the medals. His hands trembled slightly. Not from fear, from anger he was fighting to control, Boon noticed. "What? Did I hurt your feelings?" Calvin looked at the letters tied with blue ribbon. When he spoke, His voice was low. Some of those belonged to men who didn't all come home. The words changed the atmosphere instantly. Even Boon stopped smiling for a moment. Calvin carefully placed the photograph back inside. Whatever you think of me, those memories have nothing to do with this. Sloan looked uncomfortable. Travis, give him the box. Boon's expression tightened. No. He closed the lid. I'm holding it until we determine whether any of this is relevant to the security issue. There is no security issue, Sloan said. Boon turned toward him. Keep questioning me, and you can explain yourself to internal affairs. Sloan fell silent. Calvin looked at him. There was no disappointment in his expression. Only understanding. That somehow made Sloan feel worse. Boon carried the box outside. Calvin followed. Around them, people whispered. Some had begun recording. Calvin could have told them. He could have opened that box himself and explained every metal. He could have spoken one name, made one phone call, and changed the way Boon looked at him. But Calvin had spent years learning that respect obtained through rank was not the same as respect given freely, so he said nothing. Across the festival, Captain Lena Ward was pacing beside a military transport vehicle with her phone against her ear. Colonel Harris had answered on the second ring. Lena, where is he? Vendor section, Liberty Avenue. You're certain it's the same man? I sent you the photograph. A pause. Did you speak to him? Yes. What name is he using? Calvin Mercer. Silence. Then Harris exhaled. May God. Lena looked toward the distant barbecue stand. Colonel, who is he? Harris didn't answer immediately. Instead, he asked something stranger. Is he leaving? No. Police are holding his property. What? They're having some kind of dispute. Harris's voice changed instantly. Keep him there. Lena frowned. Why? Just keep him there. I'm making a call. To whom? The line went silent for 2 seconds. Then Harris answered. General Shaw. Lena froze. Lieutenant General Rebecca Shaw was the highest-ranking military guest at the entire festival. She knows him? Harris gave a humorless laugh. Captain, you have that backward. Before Lena could ask what he meant, Harris continued. Do not let Mercer leave, and whatever those officers are doing, make sure someone is recording it. The call ended. Lena lowered her phone. Back at Cal's smoke pit, Boon placed Calvin's wooden box on the hood of a patrol vehicle. Then he turned toward the crowd. This stand is temporarily closed. Maya looked devastated. Calvin simply stared at the box. The barbecue could be replaced. Money could be earned again. But inside that box were names, faces, and promises from another life. Boon thought he had confiscated an old man's collection of meaningless souvenirs. He had no idea that one photograph inside it connected the quiet black barbecue seller standing before him to the most important military guest in Fairmont. And General Rebecca Shaw had just received a phone call she never expected to get. Less than 5 minutes after Boon announced the closure, Rachel Bennett came hurrying through the crowd. What happened? Maya pointed toward the patrol vehicle. He shut us down even after dispatch confirmed the permit. Rachel looked at Boon. Officer, Cal's smoke pit is fully authorized. Boon folded his arms. There are additional concerns. What concerns? Public safety. Rachel stared at him. I personally approved Mr. Mercer's location this morning. His inspections are complete. His insurance is current. There is no violation. Sloan glanced at Boon. That settles it. But Boon had already gone too far to accept an easy way out. The permit isn't the issue anymore. Calvin's eyes narrowed. Of course it isn't. Boon turned toward him. What's that supposed to mean? It means every time one accusation fails, you invent another. A few people in the crowd nodded. Boon pointed toward them. You're creating a disturbance. Calvin looked around. I'm standing beside my barbecue stand. You're encouraging these people to interfere with police business. I haven't encouraged anyone to do anything. A man near the front raised his phone. He's right, I've recorded the whole thing. Boon turned sharply. The man was middle-aged, wearing a festival volunteer shirt. You recorded what? From when you first walked up. He tapped his screen. You said his booth number was wrong. It wasn't. Then you said the authorization code was wrong. Dispatch confirmed it. Now you're calling him disorderly. The crowd grew louder. Boon walked toward him. Stop recording. The man lowered the phone slightly. Why? Because you're interfering with an investigation. I'm standing 15 feet away. Several more phones rose. Boon looked around. He was losing control of the scene. And he knew it. Calvin recognized the moment, too. Everybody, he said calmly, give the officers space. The crowd quieted. Ironically, Calvin accomplished in 5 seconds what Boon had failed to do for 20 minutes. That humiliation was too much. Boon turned toward the barbecue stand. Clear this area. Rachel stepped forward. You have no authority to destroy a licensed vendor's setup. I said clear it. Boon grabbed the edge of a folding preparation table. Calvin immediately moved. Don't touch that. Boon shoved it. The table collapsed. Metal containers crashed onto the pavement. 48 brown meal bags spilled across the street. Some burst open. Smoked meat, bread, fruit, and bottled water rolled beneath people's feet. Maya covered her mouth. No. Calvin stopped moving. For the first time all morning, the old man looked wounded. Not because of the money, not because of the food. He stared at the handwritten cards scattered among the ruined meals. Welcome home. Boon picked one up. What's this? Calvin said nothing. Maya's voice shook. They were free meals. Boon looked at her. For who? For veterans. Silence spread through the crowd. Maya swallowed hard. He made 48 of them before sunrise. A veteran standing nearby slowly removed his cap. Another bent down and picked up one of the crushed meal bags. Boon dropped the card. Calvin stared at it on the pavement. He remembered Evelyn sitting at their kitchen table years earlier, telling him that nobody who came home from service should ever have to wonder whether someone remembered them. 48 meals, 48 small promises, ruined in seconds. Boon expected Calvin to explode. Calvin instead knelt. He picked up the first card, then another. Maya knelt beside him. A moment later, the elderly Vietnam veteran from earlier joined them. Then Rachel. Then the man with the phone. Within seconds, more than 20 strangers were helping. Someone brought garbage bags. Another vendor carried over fresh bread. A woman from a neighboring food truck placed 2 trays of chicken on Calvin's counter. These are yours. Calvin looked up. I can't take that. You're not taking it. She crouched beside him. We're replacing what he destroyed. Across the street, Sloan watched people rebuild the stand. His face tightened with shame. He walked toward Boon. This needs to stop. Boon looked at him. Excuse me? You were wrong about the permit. You were wrong about the location. And now you just destroyed his property. Watch yourself. No, you watch yourself. For the first time, Sloan did not lower his eyes. Boon stepped closer. You want to lose your badge over a barbecue vendor? Sloan looked toward Calvin. No. Then back at Boon. But I'm not losing it for you either. Boon's expression went cold. Neither man noticed Captain Lena Ward approaching from behind. She had returned just in time to see Calvin kneeling among the ruined meals. Her phone vibrated. A message appeared from Colonel Harris. General Shaw has been informed. At that exact moment, nearly 3 blocks away, Lieutenant General Rebecca Shaw stood inside the festival's military staging area. Her aides were discussing the parade route. She heard none of them. On a tablet in her hands was the photograph Lena had sent. Calvin Mercer. Older now. Gray at the temples. A barbecue apron instead of a uniform. But there was no possibility of mistake. Rebecca touched the screen. For a moment, she was no longer a lieutenant general. She was a frightened young officer standing in a desert command post decades earlier while one man refused an order that would have abandoned her unit. An aide approached. General, the VIP motorcade leaves in 12 minutes. Rebecca looked up. Cancel it. Ma'am? Change the parade route. The aide blinked. The route was approved weeks ago. Rebecca handed him the tablet. We're going down Liberty Avenue. General, that takes the formation directly through the vendor district. I know. He studied Calvin's photograph. Who is he? Rebecca took the tablet back. Her eyes remained on Calvin's face. The reason a lot of us made it home. Back at the barbecue stand, Calvin finished gathering the last ruined card. He stood slowly. Then he noticed Lena approaching. Behind her, Boon still guarded the wooden box. And far beyond the buildings, the distant rhythm of military drums began to change direction. The military drums grew louder in the distance, but Officer Travis Boon seemed determined not to hear them. He stood beside the patrol vehicle with Calvin's wooden box still on the hood. Everyone needs to clear this area. Nobody moved. Boon pointed toward Calvin. This man has repeatedly refused lawful instructions and encouraged a crowd to interfere with an investigation. Calvin stared at him. Which lawful instruction? Boon's jaw tightened. Excuse me? My permit was valid. My location was authorized. Your own partner confirmed both. Calvin gestured toward the ruined food. So tell me exactly what law I broke. Several phones remained pointed toward them. Boon stepped closer. You think this crowd makes you untouchable? No. Calvin's voice remained calm. I think admitting a mistake would have ended this 20 minutes ago. The words landed harder than a shout. Boon's face reddened. You don't lecture me. Then stop giving me reasons to. Sloan stepped between them. That's enough, Travis. Boon stared at his partner. You're taking his side? I'm taking the side of what actually happened. Boon lowered his voice. Keep this up and I'll make sure your supervisor hears about it. Sloan didn't move. Make sure he sees the body cam footage too. For the first time, uncertainty flashed across Boon's face. Then he turned away. Calvin noticed Captain Lena Ward approaching. She looked directly at him. Mr. Mercer. Captain, I need to speak with you. Before Calvin could answer, Boon raised a hand. No, you need to leave. Lena ignored him. Her attention shifted to the wooden box. Why do you have his property? Evidence. Evidence of what? That's none of your concern. Lena's expression hardened. It became my concern when you started treating military decorations like contraband. Boon laughed. You people see a couple medals and suddenly everybody's a hero. Sloan looked toward the box. Something caught his attention. The photograph Boon had handled earlier was partly visible beneath the lid. Sloan opened it slightly. Don't touch that, Boon snapped. But Sloan had already pulled out the photograph. He studied the younger Calvin standing among several uniformed officers. Then his eyes stopped on a young woman near Calvin's left shoulder. Sloan looked across Liberty Avenue. A giant festival banner hung above the street. Printed on it was the face of the day's military guest of honor, Lieutenant General Rebecca Shaw. Sloan looked back at the photograph, then at the banner, then again at the photograph. No way. Boon frowned. What? Sloan turned the picture toward Calvin. Is that General Shaw? Calvin's expression remained unreadable. Maya moved closer. She had never seen the photograph before. That's her. Lena said nothing. She already knew. Sloan looked at Calvin. You knew her? Calvin's eyes rested on the younger Rebecca in the photograph. Rebecca earned everything she became. Sloan stared at him. Rebecca. Not General Shaw. Not Lieutenant General Shaw. Rebecca. How do you know her? Calvin carefully took the photograph from Sloan. That's not important. Boon scoffed. Probably took a picture with her at some veterans event. Calvin slid the photograph back into the box. Boon reached for it. Calvin stopped his hand. Don't. Something in Calvin's voice made Boon hesitate. Then Lena stepped forward. Give him the box. Boon laughed. You don't give orders here. I'm not giving you an order. Lena looked at him coldly. I'm giving you an opportunity to stop making this worse. Boon stared at her. Who exactly do you think he is? Lena glanced toward Calvin. Calvin gave her a small shake of his head. Don't. She understood, so she said nothing. Instead, she turned toward him. Sir, someone is coming to see you. Calvin closed his eyes briefly. Rebecca? Lena nodded. A trace of frustration crossed Calvin's face. Tell her she doesn't need to. I tried. Calvin sighed. Try again. I did. Despite everything, Lena almost smiled. She wasn't interested in my opinion. Calvin looked toward the distant intersection. That sounds like Rebecca. Maya stared at him. Mr. Cal. He looked at her. You know Lieutenant General Rebecca Shaw? Calvin adjusted the towel over his shoulder. I know a lot of people. That is not an answer. It's the one I have. The military drums were closer now. Boon looked from Calvin to Lena. Suspicion was replacing arrogance. What's going on? Nobody answered. Boon grabbed his radio. Command, I need crowd control assistance at Vendor Sector B. Sloan immediately turned. For what? We have an escalating situation. You're the one escalating it. Boon ignored him. Calvin stepped toward the smoker. Can I go back to work now? Boon blocked him. You're not going anywhere. Calvin looked at him for a long moment. You still have time. For what? To stop. Boon smiled. You threatening me? No. Calvin glanced at the cameras surrounding them. I'm trying to help you. That answer infuriated Boon more than anything else had. He grabbed Calvin's arm. Maya moved forward. Get your hands off him. Calvin immediately raised his free hand toward her. Maya, stay back. Boon released him. Everybody heard that, right? He's directing the crowd again. Nobody responded. Then Lena's radio crackled. A voice came through. Captain Ward, Parade Command confirms route adjustment. Main formation entering Liberty Avenue. Lena looked toward the intersection. The first rows of spectators were beginning to turn. Music faded beneath something heavier. 500 pairs of boots striking pavement in synchronized rhythm. Boon looked toward the sound. What route adjustment? Lena didn't answer. Calvin did. They're coming this way. Boon looked at him. For the first time all day, there was something different in the officer's eyes. Not anger, fear. He looked at the wooden box, at the photograph, at Calvin, then at the approaching military formation. But instead of backing down, Boon reached toward his handcuffs. And Calvin realized the most dangerous part of the confrontation might still be ahead. The synchronized footsteps were getting closer. Officer Travis Boon heard them too, but instead of stepping back, he pulled his handcuffs from his belt. Turn around. Calvin Mercer looked at the cuffs. For what? Disorderly conduct, obstruction, refusing lawful commands. Sloan stared at his partner. You can't be serious. Boon ignored him. Hands behind your back. Maya rushed from behind the barbecue stand. No, he hasn't done anything. She stepped between Boon and Calvin. Boon pointed toward the street. Move. No. Maya. Calvin's voice stopped her. She turned. His expression was gentle. Come here. But Mr. Cal, please. Calvin placed a hand on her shoulder and carefully moved her behind him. Boon smirked. Finally learning how to follow instructions? Calvin looked at him. I'm protecting her from your temper. The smirk disappeared. Boon stepped forward. Turn around. Calvin didn't. If you're arresting me, state the specific offense. I already did. You listed words. Tell me what I actually did. People moved closer. Phones remained raised. Boon glanced at them. Calvin continued. Did I threaten you? No answer. Did I touch you? Silence. Did I refuse to show identification? Boon's jaw tightened. No. Was my permit invalid? Sloan answered. No. Boon spun toward him. Stay out of this. Sloan stepped forward. You want him cuffed? Do it yourself. Boon stared at him. That's an order. And I'm refusing it. A murmur swept through the crowd. Boon lowered his voice. You're throwing away your career. Sloan shook his head. I'm trying to keep one. Boon's face flushed. He turned back to Calvin. You see what you're doing? You've turned this whole place against us. Calvin shook his head. I didn't do that. He looked at the ruined meals. You did. Boon moved toward him with the cuffs. Calvin raised his hands slightly. I'm not resisting. Then turn around. I'll cooperate with a lawful arrest. But I want you to explain the charge while all these cameras are recording. Boon's eyes flicked toward his body camera. The indicator was still blinking. Calvin noticed. So when someone reviews that footage later, they'll hear your explanation clearly. For a moment, Boon froze. Then he leaned closer. You think anyone important is going to review this? Calvin said nothing. Boon glanced at the stained apron, the aging barbecue trailer, and Calvin's worn work shoes. His voice became louder. You're an old barbecue man causing trouble at a street festival. By tomorrow, nobody who matters will even remember your name. Several people gasped. Calvin's expression remained calm, but Maya saw the pain behind it. Not because Boon thought he was unimportant, because Calvin understood how many other people Boon must have treated this way when no cameras were watching. Captain Lena Ward stepped forward. That's enough. Boon turned. I told you to stay out of this. And I'm telling you that you're making a serious mistake. Boon laughed bitterly. Everybody keeps saying that? Maybe you should start listening. Boon's gaze landed on the wooden box. He grabbed it from the patrol hood. If this old man wants everyone impressed by his little collection, maybe we should take a closer look. Calvin's expression changed instantly. Put it down. Boon opened the lid. Or what? Those items aren't part of your argument with me. Boon lifted the photograph. Here's your famous general. He held it toward the crowd. A picture doesn't make you important. Give it back. Boon tossed the photograph toward the box. It missed. A medal fell with it. The decoration struck the pavement and rolled beneath Boon's boot. Calvin stared down. His breathing changed. Lena stepped forward. Officer, move your foot. Boon didn't. Calvin's voice became almost a whisper. Please. For the first time all day, he had said that word to Boon. Boon looked at him, then deliberately nudged the metal farther across the pavement with his boot. Pick up your souvenir later. Calvin moved. Boon grabbed his arm. Don't. Calvin pulled free. Not violently. Just enough to continue toward the metal. Boon grabbed him again. Maya cried out. Stop touching him! Boon turned toward her. You want cuffs too? He stepped toward Maya. Calvin immediately moved between them. You will not threaten her. Boon shoved Calvin's shoulder. Move. Calvin remained still. Leave her out of this. I said move! No. The word was calm. Boon's face twisted with rage. His hand came up. The slap cracked across Liberty Avenue. Calvin's head snapped sideways. Maya screamed. Someone in the crowd shouted. Sloan rushed forward. Travis. But Calvin raised one hand. Everyone stopped. For several seconds, he remained facing away from Boon. A red mark slowly appeared across his cheek. Then Calvin turned. His eyes met Boon's. There was no fear in them. No hatred either. That somehow made the moment worse. Officer, Calvin said quietly, are you certain this is the man you want to become today? Boon's chest rose and fell. He opened the handcuffs. Turn around. Then the drums stopped. Not faded. Stopped. The sudden silence rolled down Liberty Avenue. Everyone turned. At the far intersection, rows upon rows of uniformed soldiers filled the street. Hundreds of them. The formation stretched nearly an entire block. Boon stared. What the hell? Lena looked toward the front rank. Lieutenant General Rebecca Shaw was there. Beside her marched senior officers and the Festival Honor Guard. 500 soldiers had entered Liberty Avenue. Rebecca was speaking to an aide when her eyes shifted toward the commotion around Cal's smoke pit. She stopped walking. The officer beside her nearly took another step before realizing the general had frozen. One row stopped, then another. The halt traveled backward through the formation until hundreds of boots became motionless. Boon still had one open handcuff in his hand. Calvin stood before him with a red mark across his face. The old medal lay on the pavement between them. Rebecca saw it. Then she saw Calvin. Her expression changed. "General?" her aide whispered. Rebecca said nothing. She stepped out of formation. Boon raised his hand. "Ma'am, keep the formation moving. This is an active police matter." Rebecca continued walking. "Ma'am," I said. Lena caught Boon's arm. "You should stop talking." Rebecca was now 20 yards away. Then 15. Calvin watched her approach. There was no satisfaction on his face, only exhaustion. Rebecca's eyes moved from Calvin's cheek to the handcuffs in Boon's hand, then to the metal beneath his feet. The entire street had fallen silent. 500 soldiers waited behind her. Hundreds of civilians watched from both sidewalks. And for the first time since he had approached Cal's smoke pit that morning, Travis Boon seemed to understand that he might no longer control what happened next. Lieutenant General Rebecca Shaw crossed Liberty Avenue without taking her eyes off Calvin Mercer. Behind her, 500 soldiers stood motionless. Officer Travis Boon still held the open handcuffs. He cleared his throat. "Ma'am, you need to stay behind the crowd line. This man is being detained." Rebecca kept walking. "Did you hear me?" No response. Boon stepped forward. "This is a police matter." Rebecca finally stopped. Her eyes dropped to the metal on the pavement, then to Calvin's reddened cheek. "What happened here?" Boon answered immediately. "The vendor became disorderly. He refused lawful instructions and interfered with festival security." Sloan stared at him. "That's not what happened." Boon turned sharply. "Be quiet." Rebecca's eyes shifted toward Sloan. "You witnessed this?" "Yes, ma'am." "Body cameras?" "Running." Boon interrupted. "This situation is under control." Rebecca looked at the handcuffs. "It doesn't appear that way." Calvin Sahil. "Rebecca." The single word changed everything. Boon looked at him. Maya's eyes widened. Even several nearby soldiers exchanged glances. Nobody casually addressed Lieutenant General Rebecca Shaw by her first name. Rebecca turned fully toward Calvin. For the first time, the authority in her expression softened. Calvin shook his head. "Don't." Rebecca understood exactly what he meant. "Don't make this about me. Don't use my past to humiliate him. Don't turn a bad moment into a spectacle." "You taught me better than that," Rebecca said. Calvin's eyes narrowed slightly. "Rebecca, you taught me never to stay silent when something is wrong." Boon looked between them. "What exactly is going on here?" Rebecca ignored him. She bent down. Her uniformed hand reached toward the metal Boon had pushed across the pavement. She picked it up carefully. Dust covered its surface. Rebecca wiped it with her handkerchief. Then she looked at Boon. "Did you throw this?" Boon hesitated. "It fell during the investigation." "Investigation of what?" "He had questionable military items." Lena stepped forward. "No, ma'am." Officer Boon removed the box after his original permit complaint was disproven. Rachel added, "The permit was valid from the beginning." Boon's face tightened. He became confrontational. Sloan shook his head. "No, he didn't." Boon glared at him. Rebecca turned toward the crowd. "Did anyone record what happened?" Dozens of hands holding phones rose simultaneously. Boon went pale. Rebecca looked back at Calvin. She extended the medal with both hands. Calvin stared at it. "You didn't need to come." "Yes, I did." "No." His voice was softer now. "You have 500 people waiting." Rebecca glanced behind her. "They can wait." Calvin accepted the medal. For a second, neither spoke. Then a colonel standing near the front of the formation leaned toward another officer. "Is that him?" The second officer stared at Calvin. Older, gray-haired, wearing an apron. Nothing like the photographs from decades earlier, but the eyes were unmistakable. "Me God." A third officer heard them. "What?" "That's Mercer." The name traveled quietly. Mercer. Mercer? Is that really him? Boon heard it. His grip tightened around the handcuffs. "Who is Mercer?" Nobody answered him. Calvin placed the medal inside the wooden box. "Rebecca, take your formation and finish the parade." Rebecca looked at the red mark across his cheek. "Did he hit you?" Calvin said nothing. "Maya did." He slapped him. A ripple of anger moved through the soldiers nearest the front. Rebecca raised one hand. Instantly, they remained still. Boon stepped backward. He resisted. Sloane's voice cut through the silence. No, he didn't. Boon turned. Derek, you hit him because he stood between you and Maya. That's not what happened. My camera recorded everything. Boon's eyes dropped toward Sloane's body camera, then toward his own. Rebecca noticed. So did yours? Boon didn't answer. From the formation, an older command sergeant major suddenly stepped forward. He stared at Calvin for several seconds. Calvin noticed him. A faint smile touched his face. Tumas. The command sergeant major swallowed hard. Sir. Boon heard it. Sir. Another senior officer recognized Calvin. Then another. One by one, posture changed throughout the front ranks. Backs straightened. Feet came together. The command sergeant major snapped to attention. A colonel beside him followed. Then another officer. The movement spread backward. Row after row. Boon stared as hundreds of soldiers silently straightened. What are they doing? Lena looked at him. Nobody needed to answer. 500 soldiers were standing at attention for the old Black BBQ seller Boon had spent the entire morning treating as if he were beneath everyone around him. Yet Rebecca still had not spoken his rank. Calvin looked across the formation. Faces from different generations stared back at him. Some knew him personally. Others only knew the stories. He had spent years avoiding this moment. Boon looked at Calvin again. For the first time, he no longer saw the faded apron. He saw the way senior officers were standing. The way Rebecca Shaw looked at the old man. The way an entire military formation had become silent. Boon's hand slowly lowered. Who are you? Calvin met his eyes. Before he could answer, Rebecca stepped beside him. She straightened her uniform. Her heels came together. Calvin's expression changed. Rebecca, don't. But she was already raising her hand. 500 soldiers waited behind her. Boon stood frozen, and Rebecca Shaw prepared to give Calvin Mercer the one gesture that would finally reveal to everyone on Liberty Avenue exactly who the quiet barbecue seller had once been. Lieutenant General Rebecca Shaw raised her hand. The salute was sharp, perfect, and directed at Calvin Mercer. Major General Calvin Isaiah Mercer, sir. Silence swallowed Liberty Avenue. Then 500 soldiers snapped to attention. The sound of hundreds of boots striking pavement at once echoed between the buildings. Officer Travis Boon stared at Calvin. The handcuffs hung uselessly from his fingers. Major General? Calvin closed his eyes briefly. He had spent years leaving that title behind. But Rebecca held her salute until Calvin slowly returned it. Only then did she lower her hand. Maya stared at the man she had worked beside for 11 months. Mr. Cal. Calvin looked at her. You never asked. Her mouth fell open. Rebecca almost smiled. That sounds like him. Boon shook his head. This doesn't change what happened. Rebecca turned toward him. You're right. Boon seemed relieved. Then Rebecca continued. His rank changes nothing about whether you had the right to treat him this way. Her eyes moved toward the ruined meals, soaked permit, and wooden box. He deserved dignity before you knew his rank. The words traveled through the silent crowd. Calvin looked at Rebecca. That was the only statement he wanted anyone to remember. A colonel near the formation whispered something to a younger soldier. Maya heard him. General Mercer commanded the Red Valley evacuation. She turned. What was that? Rebecca heard her. An operation a long time ago. Calvin shook his head. Rebecca. But she continued carefully. Enemy fire had cut off several units. Command considered the extraction too dangerous. Rebecca looked at Calvin. He disagreed. Calvin's face tightened. There were people waiting. You risked your career. They were my people. Rebecca nodded, and 214 of them came home. The command sergeant major who had recognized Calvin earlier spoke from behind her. Some of us are standing here because he refused to leave us there. Calvin looked away. He didn't want applause. He remembered names. Men who laughed. Men who were afraid. Men whose families had waited beside telephones. And men who had not returned. Rebecca understood, so she stopped. Boon looked around desperately. I didn't know. Calvin turned toward him. That's the problem. Boon swallowed. Calvin continued. You think knowing who I was would have made this wrong? He gestured toward the crowd. But what if I really was only a barbecue seller? Boon said nothing. What if Maya had been standing here alone? Calvin's voice remained quiet. What if there were no cameras? Sloane looked down. Those questions hurt more than any accusation. Sirens sounded at the far end of Liberty Avenue. 2 police supervisors pushed through the crowd. Captain Elaine Foster approached quickly. Officer Boon. Boon straightened. Captain, this situation got out of control. The vendor became confrontational. Sloane interrupted. That's false. Boon turned. Derek. My body camera recorded everything. Captain Foster looked at him. Everything? Yes, ma'am. Rachel stepped forward. I can confirm Mr. Mercer's permit was valid. The volunteer raised his phone. I recorded the confrontation from the beginning. Others began speaking. I have it too. So do I. I recorded the slap. Captain Foster looked at Boon. Give me your body camera. Captain. Now. Boon slowly removed it. Another supervisor collected Sloane's footage. Within minutes, they reviewed enough video on a tablet to establish the sequence. The valid permit. The changing accusations. The destroyed meals. The wooden box. The metal. The threats toward Maya. And finally the slap. Boon watched Captain Foster's expression harden. Officer Boon, surrender your badge and duty weapon. His face drained. What? You are suspended from duty pending investigation. Captain, you're making this decision because he's some general? Calvin's eyes narrowed. Captain Foster shook her head. No. She held up the tablet. I'm making it because I watched what you did. Boon looked toward Calvin. The crowd expected triumph. Calvin gave him none. No smile. No insult. No revenge. He simply walked toward the patrol vehicle. My box. Boon stared at him. Captain Foster retrieved it and handed it over. Calvin opened the lid. He checked the photograph. The letters. The medals. Everything was there. Then he picked up the card Boon had dropped earlier. Welcome home. Calvin smoothed the bent paper against his palm. Rebecca stepped beside him. You all right? Calvin looked toward the ruined barbecue stand. I will be. Behind them, Boon surrendered his badge. For the first time that day, nobody was listening to his command. But Calvin didn't watch. Instead, he walked toward Maya. Think we can save dinner? She stared at the destroyed food. Then, at the hundreds of soldiers filling Liberty Avenue, a smile broke through her tears. We might need more ribs. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Rebecca turned toward the formation. Looks like the parade is taking a lunch break. 500 soldiers relaxed, and suddenly dozens began moving toward Cal's smoke pit, not because a general had ordered them, because they wanted to help. Tables were lifted. Containers replaced. Trash collected. The stand began coming back together. Calvin stood in the middle of it all, wearing the same stained apron Boon had mocked. Nothing about his clothes had changed. Nothing about his skin had changed. Nothing about the old barbecue trailer had changed. Only what everyone now knew. And as Calvin watched strangers rebuild what anger had destroyed, he understood that the most important justice would not be what happened to Travis Boon. It would be what Fairmont chose to change after the cameras were gone. 3 weeks later, Cal's smoke pit was open before sunrise. The smoker breathed hickory smoke into the cool Georgia morning, while Calvin Mercer stood exactly where he had stood hundreds of mornings before. Same faded apron, Samavorn boots, same hands brushing sauce across the ribs. But Fairmont had changed. The investigation into Travis Boon had moved quickly because there was little left to dispute. 7 body camera recordings, 32 civilian videos, witness statements, the valid vendor permit, and Boon's own incident report. That report claimed Calvin had become physically aggressive before being struck. The videos showed otherwise. Investigators also reopened 4 previous complaints against Boon. 2 involved street vendors. Another came from a homeless veteran who claimed Boon had threatened him after he asked for help. Those complaints had once been dismissed. Not anymore. Boon was terminated for unnecessary use of force, falsifying an official report, and repeated abuse of authority. But the investigation didn't stop with him. A supervising officer who had ignored earlier complaints was disciplined, and the city announced an independent review of misconduct reports involving public events. Derek Sloan kept his badge. More importantly, he kept something Calvin believed mattered more, his conscience. Sloan visited the barbecue stand one afternoon without his uniform. I should have stopped him sooner, he admitted. Calvin handed him a plate. You stopped him when it counted? I was afraid of what refusing him would cost me. Calvin nodded. Courage usually sends the bill afterward. Sloan smiled faintly. How much do I owe you? For the ribs? Yes. Calvin pushed the plate toward him. Today, nothing. A week later, Fairmont officials offered Calvin a public apology and proposed a financial settlement. Calvin accepted the apology. The settlement took longer. He had one condition. A portion would fund grants for small businesses operated by veterans and military families. A reporter asked why. Calvin answered simply, because justice shouldn't end with the person whose story happened to make the news. That sentence appeared across Fairmont the next morning. Yet Calvin refused interviews after that. He returned to cooking. Maya finally received enough financial aid to begin nursing school that fall. She continued working weekends at Cal's smoke pit. Business exploded after the festival video spread. People drove hours to meet the barbecue general. Calvin hated the nickname. "If they come for my rank, charge them double," he told Maya. She laughed. "You know I'm actually going to do that." "You better not." One quiet Tuesday afternoon, a familiar woman approached the counter. No formation, no aid, no ceremonial uniform. Rebecca Shaw wore jeans, boots, and a plain jacket. Calvin looked up from the smoker. "You lost 500 soldiers?" "I gave them the afternoon off." "Careless." Rebecca smiled. "You still serving the brisket?" "If you brought money." She placed $20 on the counter. Calvin prepared her plate himself. They sat beneath a tree behind the trailer. For several minutes, neither spoke. Rebecca took one bite. Her expression softened. "Evelyn sauce?" Calvin nodded. "Mostly." "She'd be proud." Calvin looked toward the smoker. "She should be here." Rebecca understood that some grief never disappeared. It simply learned how to sit quietly beside you. After a while, she asked the question everyone else had asked. "Why didn't you tell Boon?" Calvin knew exactly what she meant. Why not tell him you were a general? Why let him believe you were merely an old black man selling barbecue? Calvin leaned back. "Because I wanted him to treat me right when he thought I was nobody." Rebecca said nothing. If telling him my rank was the only thing that could make him respect me, then he never respected me. Calvin looked toward Liberty Avenue. "And what about the next man?" Rebecca followed his gaze. "The man without medals?" Calvin nodded. "The woman cleaning offices after midnight, the kid delivering groceries, the veteran sleeping in his car, the vendor who doesn't know a general." His voice softened. "They don't get to pull a rank out of their pocket." Rebecca looked down at her plate. "That's why you didn't want me to salute." "I didn't need saving." "I know. You did it anyway. I learned from a stubborn commander." Calvin laughed. "I regret training you." 1 year later, the Freedom and Service Festival returned. Fairmont offered Calvin the central VIP pavilion. He refused it again. Cal's smoke pit returned to B-17. Maya stood beside him wearing nursing school scrubs beneath her apron because she had come directly from class. Derek Sloan stopped by with his family. Captain Lena Ward arrived later. Rebecca came without warning. Near noon, the festival director asked Calvin to appear on the main stage. He declined. Instead, he stayed behind his smoker. Above the serving window hung a small wooden sign Maya had made. No title required for respect. There were no photographs of Calvin in uniform, no list of medals, no mention of Major General Calvin Mercer, only the sign, and beneath it stood the man himself. Police officers waited in line beside construction workers. Soldiers stood beside teachers. Veterans talked with teenagers. A judge carried her own tray. Nobody skipped ahead. Nobody received a better seat because of a title. At noon, a young soldier finally reached the counter. He recognized Calvin immediately. His posture stiffened. "General Mercer, sir." Calvin handed him a plate. "Today I'm Cal." The soldier smiled. "Yes, sir." Calvin shook his head. "You're going to make this difficult, aren't you?" The soldier laughed. Behind him, the line stretched halfway down Liberty Avenue. Calvin looked at the faces waiting there. A year earlier, 500 soldiers had stood for him. But this mattered more. They were standing beside one another. And perhaps that was the lesson Fairmont had needed all along. A uniform can reveal rank. A title can reveal achievement. Neither reveals a person's worth. Real character appears in how we treat someone when we believe they have nothing to offer us. If Calvin's story reminded you that dignity belongs to everyone, share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more stories where truth and justice still matter.